These are the brand new Adidas Predator 25 League FT. So this is the third tier takedown model with this phenomenal looking tongue. These retail at €100 instead of the €280 that you're going to have to spend to get the elite level model. And before we get going, I am going to tell you right now, these are light years ahead of the previous generation's League model, which I reviewed and absolutely hated. So why are they better, and should you buy them? We're going to start with the outsole, which you might notice is the SG outsole. However, on all of the images that you're going to be looking at on screen, I am using them on an artificial grass pitch, which is complete nonsense. Unless what I've actually done is I have added these. So these are TPU studs that you can buy. They're made by Adidas and they replace your metal studs. Now, I was experimenting by seeing if I could put the TPU studs in an SG boot and make it work for AG. You cannot. Don't do that. The studs, particularly through the heel, this plastic one, and also this one here, do not work on an AG pitch. However, if you want to convert your SG to an FG boot, these are a perfectly acceptable little solution. With that out of the way, how is this particular outsole? Well, it's actually fairly nice. This is what we have in the SG variation. It is perfectly acceptable. It's got a reasonable amount of bend in the forefoot. It's not overly flexible through the midfoot and the heel. Perfectly acceptable for a boot of this particular standard. The FG League has exactly the same stud pattern and sole plate as the previous generation, which looks pretty much identical to what you get from the elite level model. However, the plastic isn't of quite as good quality. You don't get quite as much responsiveness. It's not as good, but you know what? For the €100 that it costs for a third tier takedown, it's not bad at all. And I also don't really recommend it for AG either, just because again, those studs, particularly in the heel, can be quite long. So a perfectly acceptable sole plate all around. No real complaints for the money that you spend. Not mind-blowing, but nothing to complain about. Moving on to the upper, this is where we are going to see a massive change and a huge improvement from the previous generation. It's still called hybrid feel, this particular material, but it is so much softer than what you got on the previous generation. It's way less plasticky. It has this kind of leather grain texture through it instead of the little ridged dots. I don't really mind that. The striking element itself on the previous gen was bits of hard plastic. This has essentially been reduced down to a graphic, and I'm completely okay with that. It's only there to look like it's got a striking element. It doesn't have to have something there that's actually worse than leaving it off entirely. This upper is actually reasonably impressive for a boot at this price point, and such a huge improvement from the previous generation. Now, of course, it's on the thicker side of things, being a takedown, but I've not got that many complaints in terms of the material, how it feels, how it looks, how it performs. It's very good. It doesn't overstretch, but it is moldable to your foot. It's very good. Then of course we have the tongue, which, same as the previous generation, is a really lovely material, which is similar to that which you get on the on the elite level model. Slightly different shape, but overall still a really nice material. Not quite as padded either. No striking elements, but again, €100 versus €280, and I have very little complaints about the material of the upper and how it's built. For the touch, as I mentioned, the upper is on the thicker side, so the touch is definitely a little bit more dampened, but you can get a nice almost thud when you strike the ball. It's nothing to really criticize the boot for too much, but just be aware you're not going to get a close to the ball barefoot feel here, but that's fine by me. I just stuck my first 6, 7, 8 efforts either on the bar, over the bar, or off the post. This is not going well. Let's talk about the lockdown. The lockdown here is only okay, but that is somewhat going to be the case with a design like this, and especially depending on how you wear your tongue might depend on how good your lockdown actually is. Some people even taking out this top lace hole to get the full Beckham pull down tongue effect. So the lockdown is fine. The whole boot, similarly to the previous generation, feels a little bit shallow, which doesn't help the lockdown, and I could feel a little bit of movement in the toe box area, maybe due to a little bit of extra volume. But it's nothing really to chastise the boot for. It's just fine. It's €100. That's okay. So let's talk about the fit and sizing. And as I said, it's still very shallow. You still feel like you sit too far up in the boot and you're not fully kind of enveloped in the boot. That is particularly prevalent in the heel, where again, it just feels a little bit too shallow. There is more volume through the toe box though, and overall you just don't feel as cramped in this generation compared to the previous, and a lot of that is due to this much softer material. There is a little bit of a pinch around this area of the boot here, kind of as it comes up around the top. So if you have a kind of wider, high volume foot, this is probably going to be a bit of an issue for you. I do have a little bit of extra volume around this area of my foot, and again, I did feel that I sat up a little bit. It caused the tongue to maybe not cover as much space as I would want and bunch slightly. None of these, well, the depth, the feeling shallow in the boot is an issue, and it is something you should absolutely be aware of, and it is probably the only reason that I personally wouldn't wear these boots on a regular basis. But if you can get over that, everything else that I've mentioned is going to come down to your foot shape quite a lot, and overall is probably something that you're going to be able to live with to get something that looks this good and looks exactly like that elite level model. I mean, it does look very similar for way less than half the price. So there's only so much I can criticize that. So wide feet, yes, you have your adjustability, but I still don't think you're going to get a particularly wide foot in there, so I'm not recommending it for very wide feet. And in terms of sizing, your normal sizing on the Predator is what I would say, which complicates things. So in the F50 Elite, F50 Messi, I wear a US 7.5, UK 7. In the Predator line, so far across the line, I'm wearing a US 8, UK 7.5. So I have about a quarter size worth of length on the end of pretty much all of the Predators, but I'm okay with that because of the increased comfort. So if you want a very simple recommendation here, it is to go up half a size. But bear in mind, up half a size for me here is the same size that I get in US size as Nike. Dear God, sizing's complicated. If you have questions, please put them down in the comments. I will respond to everybody and give you sizing advice. A few other things that I want to praise. The overall comfort, I think, is pretty good, aside from that slightly shallow feeling. The materials that they've used through the heel, this synthetic suede, is absolutely glorious. The shaping of the heel isn't too bad either, and the way they've done the padding is okay. And it's much better than the previous generation because it's quite simply not as stiff and uncomfortable. So if they could just give you that little bit more depth in the overall fit of the boot, I think they could be onto something really quite special here. In short, this is a great €100 alternative to a €280 boot that is a million times better than its predecessor, and you can have those lovely David Beckham looks without spending David Beckham millions.